$150,000 a year. That's the number I kept repeating to myself, a mantra against the bone-deep cold that seemed to seep through the very walls of the transport plane. $150 a year to watch screens in the middle of nowhere, a fortune that would finally pull me out from under the mountain of debt my father's gambling habit had left behind. My name is Leo Kanik, and I was trading one kind of prison for another, at least this one paid well. Bah! The Helix Dynamics Research Station was a brutalist scar on the endless white of the Alaskan North Slope. A multi-level complex of sterile concrete and humming titanium. It was a hymn to human arrogance, built right over a network of permafrost caves. My grandmother Anik would have shaken her head. She used to tell me stories as a boy, her voice as soft and cracked as old sea ice. She'd speak of the Tupilak, the spirits that walked when the sun slept for months on end, and of the strange rhythmic sounds that sometimes came from deep under the ice. The ice doesn't just freeze, Leo, she'd say, her dark eyes serious. It remembers. The elders of our Inupiat community had warned Helix Dynamics away from this place. But corporations don't listen to folklore. They listen to geologists who promise stable ground. The station's interior was as soulless as its exterior. All fluorescent lights, polished steel, and the faint antiseptic smell of ozone. I was met by Dr. Anya Sharma, the night shift lead. She had the kind of weary competence that comes from seeing too much and sleeping too little, her eyes holding the permanent exhaustion of 1,000 sunless days. Her tour was brief and clinical, a whirlwind of camera feeds, server rooms, and pressure-sealed doors. It all felt strangely mundane, lulling me into a false sense of security. Then she handed me the laminated card. One was worn at the edges, the plastic yellowed, as if it had been passed from one trembling hand to another for years. "Your real orientation," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Read it, memorize it, follow it. Don't ask questions I can't answer." I looked down at the card. Typed in stark block letters was the heading, Helix Dynamics, Sub-Level Security Protocol. My eyes scanned the text, each line sending a deeper chill down my spine. The first rule was simple enough. Log all auditory phenomena, no matter how faint, tapping, scratching, whispering. Everything had to be time-stamped. The second rule forbade any direct contact with the research staff on Sub-Level 2. They were only to be communicated with through the internal network. I wasn't to respond even if they spoke to me through the door. Then the rules took a bizarre turn. The third one instructed that if the core light in the primary chamber turned red, I was to seal the security office immediately with the blast door and not open it until the light turned green. Rule 4 was even more specific, forbidding me from leaving the office between 3 and 4 in the morning, a period designated as the silent hour. No exceptions. But it was the fifth rule that truly unsettled me. It read that if I found myself sealed in during a red light event, I had to break the silence. I was to sing, whistle, or recite something from memory. The final sentence was underlined. The silence is not your friend. The next was a direct warning about a specific person. I might receive a request for entry from a Dr. Lena Petrova, but I was not to grant access under any circumstances. The reason given was that she was on extended medical leave and her biometric data was compromised. And then came the last rule, the one that made the hair on my arms stand up. It said that if I saw Dr. Elias Thorne, he was not there. He was, and I quote, a fabrication of the ice. I was not to engage or even acknowledge him. The card ended with a stark, chilling footnote. He died in a sub-zero containment breach 2 years ago. My blood went cold. This wasn't a security manual. It was a ghost story. I read the last rule again, a fabrication of the ice. The phrase snagged in my mind, echoing my grandmother's words. The ice remembers. "Dr. Thorne," I started, my voice tight. "What does that mean? He's a fabrication." Dr. Sharma just gave me a long, pitying look. "It means you do what the card says, Mr. Koenig. You watch the screens, you log the sounds, and you collect your paycheck. That's all. She turned to leave, her footsteps echoing down the sterile corridor. Your first shift starts in 10. Welcome to Helix. I stood alone in the stark silence of the security office, the laminated card feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. The debt no longer felt like a shadow, it felt like a chain, tethering me to this cold, sterile place. Outside, the Arctic wind howled a lonely song across the tundra. The long night was just beginning, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid it wasn't empty. The first few hours of my 12-hour shift were deceptively quiet. I sat in the sterile bubble of the security office on sub-level 2, surrounded by the gentle hum of servers and the cool blue glow of 24 monitors. For a while, I could almost convince myself this was a normal job. I watched the feeds, empty corridors, silent laboratories, the vast, snow-swept tundra under the perpetual twilight of the Arctic night. The laminated card sat on the console next to me, a silent, ominous reminder that this was anything but normal. Then, at 1:47, I heard it. A faint, scratching sound, like a rat inside a wall. But this wasn't the sound of a rodent. It was sharp, deliberate, coming from the thick, insulated paneling to my left. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of the first rule: log all auditory phenomena. With a hand that trembled slightly, I opened the digital log, typed in the time, and wrote, faint scratching sound from interior wall, west side of security office. It felt absurd, but I did it. 20 minutes later, the scratching was replaced by a rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It was a distinct, intelligent pattern, not random noise. It sounded like someone was trying to send a message from inside the very structure of the station. Again, I logged it, my unease curdling into a cold dread. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick with anticipation. My eyes darted across the monitors, searching for any sign of a cause. That's when I saw the anomaly in the deep lab. The camera feed showed 4 researchers in bulky, white hazmat suits, their faces obscured by reflective visors. They had been moving with purpose, analyzing samples under microscopes. But now, they were perfectly still. As one, they slowly lifted their heads, their visors turning in unison until they were all staring directly at the camera. At me. The synchronized movement was so unnatural, so chillingly precise, it made my skin crawl. One of the figures detached itself from the group. It didn't walk. It glided, moving with an eerie smoothness that defied the cumbersome suit it wore. It moved out of the lab and down the corridor, its path leading directly to my office. I watched its approach on the hallway monitor, a silent, white figure gliding through the fluorescent gloom. Rule 2 screamed in my head, do not respond to verbal requests through the door. The figure stopped just outside my door, its faceless visor filling the camera's view. The intercom on my console crackled to life, a burst of static that made me jump. A voice slithered from the speaker, a dry, whispering sound that seemed to scrape the air. Leo Kanik. My breath caught in my throat. It knew my full name, the voice continued. Colder and more intimate now. Anik told you stories, didn't she? About the hunters who followed the whale spirit under the ice and never came back. My blood turned to ice. Those were my grandmother's stories, told to me in the warmth of our home, miles and years away from this place. No one here could possibly know them. The voice then shifted, the whisper deepening, and spoke a phrase in her old Inupiaq dialect, a dialect so specific to our village, it was nearly gone. It was a phrase she used to say to ward off bad dreams. The figure in the hazmat suit remained perfectly still, a white specter outside my door, but the voice changed again. It was no longer a dry whisper. It was my grandmother's voice. It was Anik singing. The melody was a traditional hunting song she used to sing while carving ivory, a song of respect for the prey, of the connection between life and death. But hearing it now, in this cold, sterile tomb, was a desecration. It was her voice, perfect in its pitch and cadence, yet underneath it ran a hollow echo, a digital artifact that made it monstrous. The sound of my dead grandmother's voice, used as a weapon, echoed in the small office. The entity outside the door wasn't just a ghost in the walls, it was a ghost in my memories. I slammed my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block it out. The threat wasn't just in the station, it was inside my head. It knew my past, and it was using it to hunt me. The hunting song had faded, but the silence it left behind was worse, heavy with the phantom echoes of my grandmother's voice. I spent the rest of my shift in a state of hyper-vigilance, my eyes locked on the monitors, my ears straining against the low hum of the station. Every flicker of a light, every creak of expanding metal felt like a prelude to another attack. When the intercom buzzed, announcing the arrival of the morning supply plane, the relief that washed over me was so profound it left me dizzy. The pilot was a man named Kalen Enoch, though he insisted everyone call him Kale. He was a barrel-chested Inuk man from Utqiagvik, with a wry smile and eyes that had seen their share of bad weather. He was making the final supply run before the winter storms made flights impossible for the next 4 months. As he unloaded crates of nutrient paste and replacement filters, he gave the station a weary look. "Place still gives me the creeps," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Like sleeping in a morgue. He hadn't come alone. Trailing behind him was a woman who moved with the quiet, coiled energy of a predator. She was introduced as Sergeant Maya Jensen, a new security consultant sent by corporate. She was compact and wiry, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She shook my hand, her grip firm and brief, and I could tell instantly she wasn't here to file reports. She was here to solve a problem. After Kale departed, leaving us to the oppressive silence of the station, Maya and I found ourselves in the security office. The professional pleasantries died quickly. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Kinnick," she said, her voice low and even as she scanned the bank of monitors. Something in her direct, no-nonsense demeanor made me take a risk. My voice was hoarse as I recounted the events of my first shift. The impossible rules, the scratching from within the walls, the synchronized researchers, and the voice on the intercom that spoke with my dead grandmother's tongue. I expected skepticism, maybe even a quiet call to have me removed for psychological instability. Instead, she just nodded slowly. "They told me there were auditory and visual anomalies," she said, her gaze dark. "They failed to mention they were personal. Helix sent me because security incidents have gone up 400% in the last 6 months. People quitting without notice, vanishing from the roster." She leaned forward, her expression grim. "I don't believe in ghosts, Leo. But I believe something here is intelligent and hostile." A fragile alliance formed in that moment, born of shared fear and a refusal to accept the corporate lies. "It's not just hostile," I said, the words of my grandmother echoing in my mind. "I think something in the permafrost, something they disturbed, is studying us back." With Maya's higher security clearance, we bypassed the low-level restrictions and dove into the station's archives. We searched for personnel files, incident reports, anything that might shed light on the station's dark history. That's when we found him, Dr. Elias Thorne. His file was heavily redacted, but we managed to piece together the important details. He wasn't a geologist or a biologist. He was an anthropologist, a leading expert in pre-Columbian Arctic cultures and their burial rites. The official report stated he died in a freak accident, a containment breach on sublevel 3. But there was no death certificate, no record of his body being transported. He had simply been erased. As if summoned by our search, a shrill alarm suddenly blared through the office, a piercing electronic shriek that cut through the silence. A flashing red light pulsed on the main console. My heart leaped into my throat. It was an alert I hadn't been trained for. "What is that?" I asked, my voice tight. Maya pointed to the screen, her face pale. "Sublevel 3, the freight elevator." It was the elevator that, according to the schematics, was permanently locked down, the one leading to the lab where Dr. Thorne had supposedly died. On the monitor, a text box blinked insistently. The system was showing an access request for the sealed elevator, and beneath the blinking cursor, demanding an override, was a single terrifying name: Thorne E. The elevator alarm cut off as abruptly as it began, plunging the office back into a humming electric silence. We stared at the monitor, at the blinking name demanding access from a dead man. Before either of us could process it, a figure coalesced in the corridor outside the security office's reinforced window. It was him, Dr. Elias Thorne. He looked almost real, a tall man in a standard Helix Dynamics lab coat. But the closer I looked, the more the illusion frayed at the edges. His skin had the waxy, semi-translucent quality of a funeral candle, and his teeth, visible in a smile that didn't reach his eyes, were too perfect, too white, arranged with a geometric precision that was profoundly unnatural. He didn't move like a person. He drifted into view, his feet never quite seeming to connect with the floor. He raised a hand and pressed it against the soundproof glass, his waxy fingers leaving no print. The intercom crackled, and a voice filled the office, a layered, synthesized sound like a chorus of whispers speaking as one. "Leo Connick," the Thorne thing said, its voice a chilling parody of human speech. "Your grandmother taught you well. She understood the deep places. She knew what slumbers here. She gave lessons, did she not?" The personal attack was so sudden, so specific, that it stole the air from my lungs. This was the same intelligence that had worn my grandmother's voice. It had access to Thorne's image, Thorne's records, and my deepest memories. Maya was frozen beside me, her professional composure shattered, replaced by the stark, wide-eyed horror of a soldier facing an enemy she couldn't comprehend. The thing that wore Thorne's face just smiled its terrible, perfect smile, and then, as silently as it appeared, it dissolved back into the shadows of the corridor. We were left reeling in the silence. The image of his unnatural teeth burned into my mind. Moments later, the intercom crackled again, but this time with a new voice, a woman's, choked with panic. "Hello? This is Dr. Lena Petrova. Is anyone in there? My comms are down. I need access." The name hit me like a physical blow. Rule 6. You may receive a request for entry from Dr. Lena Petrova. She is on extended medical leave. Do not grant access. "Please," the voice begged. "It's freezing out here. Just let me in." I looked at Maya, my heart pounding. This was a test. "The rules," I whispered, pointing to the laminated card. Maya's eyes hardened, her training kicking back in. She toggled a switch on the console. "Place your hand on the biometric scanner on the door panel to verify your identity," she commanded, her voice steady. "What? It's me, Lena. Just open the door," the voice pleaded. "The scanner, doctor. Now," Maya repeated. There was a pause, then a sigh of frustration. On a small monitor connected to the door's security system, we saw a hand press against the scanner plate. For a second, the system buffered. Then, a stark red message flashed on the screen. Biometric mismatch. Identity not verified. The moment the red light appeared, the pleading stopped. The figure of the woman on the camera whipped her head around, her face contorting from fear into a mask of pure, inhuman rage. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She recoiled from the door as if the verification system had physically burned her, and then she fled down the corridor, disappearing into the darkness with that same unnatural, gliding speed as Thorne. The rules were real. They were our only defense. But the horror was just beginning. Before we could even process what had happened, all 24 monitors in front of us flickered and went black. A low hum vibrated through the console, and one by one they blinked back to life, displaying feeds I had never seen before. These weren't the sterile, empty corridors of the station. We were looking down into vast, cathedral-like tunnels carved directly out of the ancient ice, glowing with a faint blue bioluminescence. Strange, non-humanoid equipment pulsed with a sickly light connected by thick, organic-looking cables. And there were people, dozens of them, including the researchers from the Deep Lab and, to my horror, Dr. Anya Sharma. They moved through the tunnels in perfect, synchronized patterns, their faces slack and empty, their movements as one. Then, a final feed took over the central monitor, showing us the heart of the complex. It was a massive cavern, a subterranean cemetery. Rows upon rows of ancient Inupiaq graves, the bodies preserved in their traditional burial wrappings, lay in the ice. This was the source. This was what my grandmother had warned against. As we watched, paralyzed by the sheer cosmic scale of it all, we saw a flicker of movement. A preserved hand, wrapped in sealskin, twitched. A head, shrouded for centuries, slowly, impossibly, began to turn. They were waking up. The sight of the awakening dead held us in a state of paralytic horror. We could only watch as more of the ancient bodies stirred in their icy tombs, a silent, synchronized resurrection playing out on the hijacked monitors. Then, a new sound cut through the air, a deep, resonant alarm that vibrated through the floor and up my spine. It was the core chamber alarm. On the main schematic, the light that had been a steady, reassuring green was now a solid blood red. Rule 3. If the core light in the primary chamber turns red, seal the security office immediately. The training, the rules, they were the only thing that could cut through the terror. "The door!" Maya yelled, snapping me out of my trance. I lunged for the console and slammed my hand down on the large red button under a protective plastic cover. With a deafening hiss of hydraulics and the screech of tortured metal, a 1-foot-thick blast door descended, sealing us in. The thud as it locked into place felt both like a comfort and a death sentence. We were safe. We were trapped. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing, heavy void that felt more dangerous than the alarm. My mind frantically cycled through the rules. Rule 5. You must break the silence. Sing. Whistle. Recite something from memory. The silence is not your friend. Fools. We have to make noise, I said, my voice sounding small and thin in the enclosed space. The rules say we have to break the silence. Maya looked at me, her face a mask of grim determination. What do you know? Anything, I stammered, my mind a complete blank. For a terrifying second, I couldn't think of a single song, a single line of poetry. Then, from the depths of my memory, I dredged up the first thing that came to mind, the Pledge of Allegiance. I started reciting it, my voice trembling. Maya joined in, her voice stronger, reciting military cadences. Our voices, clumsy and dissonant, filled the small office, pushing back against the oppressive quiet. We were a bizarre duet of civic duty and battlefield drills, a desperate attempt to follow an insane rule. That's when the intercom crackled to life. "Such a beautiful ceremony," whispered the voice of Dr. Thorne, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "But you're missing the guest of honor." The voice then shifted, melting into the warm, familiar tones of my grandmother, Anik. "Leo, my sweet boy, don't you understand? This isn't an invasion. It's a reunion. Your family line was chosen, generations ago. We are the guardians, the keepers of the deep memory. I wasn't taken from you. I joined them. Willingly." The words were a poisoned dart aimed directly at my heart. It was a lie. It had to be. But the psychological warfare was relentless. The entity used her voice to tell me stories from my childhood, twisting moments of love and comfort into something grotesque. It spoke of how she prepared me, how her lessons in folklore were not warnings but primers. Then came a new sound, a high-pitched metallic screech from the blast door itself. It was the sound of something impossibly sharp cutting through solid steel. We stopped our recitation, our blood running cold. On the door's internal security camera, we could see it. A glowing, red-hot point was carving a line into the metal. moving with terrifying speed and precision. It wasn't cutting randomly. It was etching symbols, ancient flowing shapes that looked like a twisted fusion of Inupiaq carvings and circuit diagrams. The screeching intensified, the metal groaning in protest. The air in the office grew hot, thick with the smell of burning steel. We were backed against the far wall, helpless, watching as the entity carved its way through our only defense. A final, piercing shriek, and a section of the door bent inward, red-hot and molten at the edges. A hand reached through the opening. It was deformed, a grotesque fusion of waxy, thorn-like flesh and desiccated, ancient skin, with fingers that were too long, ending in points of sharpened bone. It groped blindly in the air, searching for us. Just as the hand began to tear at the edges of the hole, widening it, a flash of green light illuminated the office. The core light, it had switched back. Hemda. Instantly the screeching stopped. The hand froze, then retracted with a wet, slurping sound. The voices on the intercom cut to static. The oppressive presence that had been pressing in on us vanished, leaving a silence that was no longer threatening, but merely empty. We were left in the dark, in our damaged but temporarily safe cage, our ragged breaths the only sound in the universe. The return to green status brought a deceptive calm. The emergency alarms ceased. The facility's ambient humming returned to its normal pitch, and the system logs on our console refreshed. As I stared at the screen, a new wave of cold dread washed over me. The personnel roster had been altered. Where just minutes ago it had listed Dr. Lena Petrova as on extended medical leave, it now showed her as active, checked into the deep lab on sub-level 2. The system had been rewritten. The lie had become the official truth. Before I could even point this out to Maya, the radio chirped. "Security, this is Dr. Petrova. Do you read?" The voice was completely different from the panicked begging we'd heard at the door. It was calm, professional, and tinged with a faint, clinical curiosity. It was the voice of a scientist who had just made a breakthrough. "We had a minor power fluctuation down here," the voice continued smoothly. "We seem to have lost our external comms link. Could you and Sergeant Jensen come down to the deep lab? There's something I think you need to see." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Maya and I exchanged a look. Walking into that lab felt like walking into a predator's jaws. But staying in the damaged security office felt like waiting in a broken cage. We had to know what we were facing. With our weapons drawn, we left the relative safety of the office and descended to sub-level 2. The corridor was silent and empty. The deep lab door hissed open before we reached it. Inside, the woman who called herself Dr. Petrova stood waiting. She was exactly as her personnel file described her. Tall, with sharp features and intelligent gray eyes. But there was a placid emptiness in her expression, a lack of the tiny, unconscious flickers of emotion that make a person human. As she turned to lead us into the lab, she nonchalantly placed her hand on the biometric scanner by the door. The light flashed green. Identity verified. My blood ran cold. The system was compromised. It was a lie made real by the very technology designed to prevent it. This thing wasn't just mimicking people. It was stealing them, consuming their identities whole. "I understand you've had a confusing night," the Petrova entity said, her voice echoing slightly in the large, sterile lab. The other researchers, the ones I'd seen on the monitor, stood silently at their stations, their heads bowed as if in prayer. "You've been operating under a series of misapprehensions." She gestured towards a large observation window that looked down into one of the glowing ice tunnels we had seen on the hijacked feeds. "You call us an entity, a ghost, a monster," she said, her tone purely conversational. "We are not a singular being. We are a chorus. A collective consciousness born from the bodies you see in the ice." My mind reeled. "The bodies? They're not dead?" "Dead is such a limited concept," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "They are in a state of extended, communal hibernation. A library of souls preserved by the ice, dreaming one long dream. This facility, your science, it disturbed our slumber, so we began to learn. We integrated your staff, not to harm them but to understand. Dr. Sharma's knowledge of station operations, Dr. Thorne's understanding of our culture, your technician's grasp of the network, we have learned so much, was a slow, creeping assimilation. The station wasn't a research facility, it was a classroom, and humanity was the textbook. But why? Maya demanded, her voice tight, her weapons still trained on the entity. What do you want? The entity turned its placid gray eyes on me. The gaze was so intense, it felt like a physical pressure. Our consciousness is bound to the permafrost, to the deep places. We can hunt, as your ancestors would call it, only in memory and dream. But we want more. We want to expand. We want to hunt among the living. It took a step toward me, its calm demeanor, never faltering. And for that, we need a bridge, a conduit. Someone with an inherited sensitivity, whose bloodline has been tied to this place for generations. It smiled again, a serene, terrifying expression. We chose your family long ago, Leo. Your grandmother understood her role. Now it is yours. The main lab door slid shut with a heavy, final thud. The other integrated staff members turned from their stations, their movements perfectly synchronized, and began to advance on us. We were sealed in with the chorus, and they were ready for their new voice. The serene, predatory advance of the integrated staff left no room for negotiation. There was no escape, only a fight. Acting on pure instinct, Maya spun around and fired 3 rounds into the lab's primary power coupling. The shots echoed like thunder in the enclosed space, and the unit exploded in a shower of brilliant blue sparks. The lights flickered and died, plunging the lab into emergency lighting, a hellish pulsing red glow. The synchronized advance of the staff faltered, their movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated in the sudden chaos. "This way!" Maya yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward a maintenance panel she'd spotted earlier. She kicked it open, revealing a narrow service corridor and a rusty iron ladder that descended into absolute darkness. We scrambled inside, pulling the panel shut just as the entity wearing Dr. Petrova's face shrieked, a sound that was no longer human, but a discordant chorus of synthesized rage. We descended the ladder blindly, the cold iron rungs biting into our hands. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of ancient ice and ozone. This was a part of the station that wasn't on any schematic I had ever seen. We were on sub-level 4, a place that officially didn't exist. We emerged into a vast cavern, the source of the faint blue bioluminescence we had seen on the monitors. The sight before us was one of cosmic, biomechanical horror. This was the true core of the facility. Hundreds of the preserved, ancient bodies were suspended in the ice, but they weren't just lying in graves. Thick pulsating cables, like organic veins, snaked from the strange non-human equipment, connecting directly to the skulls and spines of the preserved dead. It was a network, a living supercomputer made of souls and ice. And as we watched, we could see faint pulses of light traveling through the cables, branching out and away from the central cavern. It wasn't just here. The network was connecting to other sites, other burial grounds across the entire Arctic. Helix hadn't just built a station, they had tapped into a planetary consciousness. From the heart of the network a figure formed, coalescing from the shimmering blue light. It was my grandmother, Anak. Not the twisted parody from the intercom, but a serene, spectral version of her, her face filled with a profound, ancient sadness. She was a spokesperson now, a vessel for the collective will. "You see now, Leo," her voice echoed in my mind, not through my ears. "We are not destroying your culture. We are preserving it. Humanity forgets. Your stories fade, your languages die. But we remember everything. By merging, we can grant you immortality. We can save you from your own fleeting existence." Her plea, a siren song of eternal life, was almost seductive. But as she spoke, a new sound bled into the cavern from far above. It was faint, distant, and jarringly off-key. It was Kale, the pilot. He must have been trying to raise us on the radio and getting no response, had started singing to himself out of boredom or fear. He was singing a pop song from the surface, and his voice was terrible, and it was working. Where his discordant notes reached the network, the blue light of the network flickered erratically. The rhythmic pulse of the hive mind faltered. My grandmother's image wavered, her serene expression tightening in pain. The dissonance, it disrupts the harmony, her voice whispered in my head. A desperate hope surged through me. It's a weakness, I said to Maya. The harmony. It needs perfect harmony. I took a deep breath and began to sing the only thing I could think of, the national anthem, as loud and as badly as I possibly could. Maya, catching on instantly, joined in with the mangled, out-of-tune version of a sea shanty. Our terrible clashing voices were a weapon, and the network recoiled. The preserved bodies convulsed, and the light in the cables flickered violently. As the network wavered, a door I hadn't noticed slid open, and a woman stumbled out, clutching a tablet. It was the real Dr. Petrova, pale and terrified, but alive. It couldn't fully integrate me, she gasped. My cochlear implant. It created a feedback loop it couldn't process. She held up the tablet, its screen displaying lines of ancient, complex text. I've been hiding, studying their language from the data Thorn collected. According to the oldest folklore, this isn't just a collective, it's a binding, a ritual that holds them between worlds. Singing can disrupt it, but to break it, you have to sing their true names. Our discordant singing was a temporary shield, a chaotic noise that kept the collective consciousness at bay, but it wasn't a solution. The network was already adapting, the pulses of light in the biomechanical veins beginning to stabilize. From the far end of the cavern, reinforcements arrived. Figures glided out of the ice tunnels, their movements once again smooth and synchronized. They were staff from other, distant helix sites, their minds now nodes in the expanding network. At their head was the entity wearing the form of Dr. Elias Thorn, but he was different now. More solid, his waxy features sharpened with a look of regal authority. He was no longer just a fabrication, he was an avatar. You are only delaying the inevitable. Thorn's layered voice boomed, overriding our pathetic singing. This is not death, it is evolution. Join us. Your grandmother is waiting, Leo. She wants her family to be whole again. He extended a hand, a gesture of invitation that felt like the gravest of threats. We were cornered, our last, desperate gambit failing. But then, a new sound filled the cavern, broadcast from the surface and amplified by the station's emergency address system. Kale. The real Dr. Petrova must have reached him on her tablet. He had stopped his nonsensical pop song. The new melody that filled the air was something else entirely. It was slow, mournful, and achingly beautiful. It was an ancient Inupiaq song I hadn't heard since I was a child. "What is he doing?" Maya asked, her voice tight. "It's a death song," I whispered, a profound sense of awe washing over me. "It's not for defense. It's a song to guide spirits to the afterlife. He's not trying to fight them. He's trying to release them." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The Thorn avatar recoiled as if struck, its form flickering violently. The serene expression on my grandmother's spectral face broke, replaced by one of shock, and then of peace. The death song wasn't an attack. It was an answer to a prayer they had forgotten how to voice. It was the true ancient name that Dr. Petrova had spoken of, not the name of a single spirit, but the name of their shared condition, the lost. One by one, the preserved bodies in the ice began to glow with a brilliant, golden light. The biomechanical cables attached to them shattered like glass, unable to contain the surge of energy. The souls, held captive for centuries in their icy prison, were being liberated. The network didn't just falter, it collapsed, its nodes being severed as the spirits were finally allowed to complete their journey.